On a frozen battlefield, in the beating heart of pagan Europe, history holds its breath. A line of 800 men prepares to face a human ocean of 12,000. They do not seem of this world. They are clad in steel from head to toe, their cloaks as white as the snow they tread upon, marked with an ominous black cross that seems to absorb the light of the pale sun. To the vast Lithuanian army observing them from the other side of the field, they are not merely men. They are an apparition, a nightmarish mirage. Iron demons emerged from a terrible legend. This is not a simple battle for land or wealth. It is a violent collision between two eras, a trial by combat where the brute force and courage of a horde will clash with the lethal discipline of the most perfect killing machine of the Middle Ages. From the Lithuanian perspective, victory seems an inevitable conclusion, a simple matter of arithmetic. They are a forest against a handful of trees, a raging sea against a solitary rock. How could such a thin line withstand the tide of 10,000 warriors? They trust in their ferocity, in their overwhelming numerical superiority, and in the agility of their light cavalry, accustomed to striking and vanishing like ghosts in the woods. They see the knights, motionless and silent, and mistake it for fear or indecision, not understanding that what they are witnessing is not hesitation, but the terrifying calm of a predator that knows its prey has fallen into the trap. They are about to learn, in the most brutal way possible, that on the battlefield of history, it is not always the side with more soldiers that wins, but the annihilation that is about to be unleashed will not be a divine miracle, but the result of a military equation, as cold and precise as the steel of a Teutonic sword. It will be the inevitable consequence of applying overwhelming force at a single, decisive point. It is the story of how superior technology, embodied in full-plate armor, the fanatical discipline of a monastic order of warriors, and the perfected shock tactic of the couched lance charge met a numerous but technologically inferior and tactically fragmented enemy. The Teutonic Knights did not win because they were better men, nor even because they had God on their side. They won because they were, in themselves, a superior weapons system, and they were about to demonstrate its terrible effectiveness. At the head of this phalanx of steel stands a figure forged in the crucible of faith and war, the Grand Marshal of the Teutonic Order. Men like Henning Shindikov are not kings or nobles seeking personal glory. They are the cold, pragmatic administrators of sacred violence. For him, battle is not a chaos of passions, but an extension of prayer, a divine duty executed with the precision of a surgeon. His confidence stems not from arrogance, but from an absolute faith in the doctrine of his order, a system perfected over a century of ceaseless warfare. He does not see the 12,000 warriors before him as an insurmountable obstacle, but as a harvest of pagan souls ready to be reaped in the name of God, and his sword is the scythe. His instrument of faith is an elite force of barely 800 lances. This term is misleading, for each lance is a combat unit, a microcosm of military power comprising the knight brother, his sergeants, and mounted crossbowmen. Each knight is the functional equivalent of a medieval tank, a professional of shock warfare who has dedicated his entire life to the art of the devastating charge. Their motivation is as impenetrable as their armor, the Northern Crusade. They fight not for a feudal lord, but for a divine mandate to eradicate paganism by force, expand the domains of the order, and baptize the lands of the Baltic with steel and blood. This fanaticism makes them a fearless force, immune to doubt and terrifyingly resolute. Facing this fist of steel stretches a sea of wild humanity, the grand army of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. Led by tribal chieftains like the legendary Algirdas and Kęstutis, their confidence is based on a simple proven truth, the strength of numbers. They command a massive horde of up to 12,000 warriors, a force composed mainly of light cavalry and agile infantry. They are the undisputed masters of their own terrain, experts in ambush, lightning raids, and guerrilla warfare in the dense forests and swamps of the region. They have resisted the Crusaders for generations, bleeding them with hit-and-run tactics, and they see the small force before them as an arrogant enemy who has made the fatal mistake of facing them in open country. However, in their greatest strength lies their catastrophic weakness. The Lithuanian mindset is incapable of understanding the fundamental nature of Teutonic shock warfare. Their experience tells them that war is fluid, a dance of feints and skirmishes where numbers and speed are everything. They believe their vast horde can simply surround, overwhelm, and engulf the small, slow formation of knights, like a wave swallowing a rock. They fatally underestimate the psychological and, above all, physical impact of a disciplined formation of heavy cavalry charging in perfect union. Their blind spot is not the courage or skill of the knights, but the pure physics and concentrated brutality they are about to unleash. The chessboard for this confrontation has been chosen with lethal cunning by the knights. It is not a dense forest or a treacherous swamp, the preferred terrain for the Lithuanians, ghost-like warfare. It is an open, frozen plain, a blank canvas of snow and death. This open field is, in fact, the Order's secret weapon. It completely neutralizes their enemies. Greatest advantage, mobility and guerrilla warfare. It denies them any cover, any opportunity for ambush. More importantly, it transforms the battlefield into a perfect launching strip, a stretch of frozen earth where their heavy cavalry charge can achieve maximum, utterly unstoppable speed and kinetic momentum. Anywhere else, the 800 would have been hunted and annihilated. Here, in this deliberate void, they are the hunters. The Teutonic strategy lies not in complex maneuvers, but in the brutal simplicity of their steel-like discipline. They will not charge immediately. They will hold firm, a wall of steel and faith, while the first wave of Lithuanian fury, a shower of darts and arrows, crashes harmlessly against their shields and armor. They are an anvil awaiting the hammer. They wait, absorbing the pressure, tempting their enemies. Impatience, knowing that the horde, frustrated, will make the fatal mistake of abandoning its cohesion in a disorganized, furious charge. It is at that precise moment that hell will be unleashed. To witness the charge that made the earth tremble and annihilated an army, and to ensure you don't miss the impact that will define an era, join our order of battle chroniclers, leave your like, and subscribe now. History awaits your oath. The battle begins not with a clash of steel, but with a deadly hiss that fills the sky. From the other side of the field, the Lithuanian commanders give the order, and thousands of bows are drawn in unison. A dense, black cloud of arrows and javelins rises, obscuring the sun for an instant before descending in a lethal storm upon the motionless line of knights. It is their proven tactic, the shower of projectiles designed to bleed, disorganize, and sow panic in the enemy ranks before the main clash. For the Lithuanians, it is the prelude to a massacre, the softening of a target before the wave of their warriors engulfs it completely. They expect to see rearing horses, fallen men, and gaps in the enemy formation. But what happens next defies their understanding of war. The storm of projectiles strikes the Teutonic line not with the sound of pierced flesh, but with the metallic clang of 1,000 hammers hitting anvils. Arrows bounce harmlessly off the curves of the plate armor, javelin points shatter against the great helms and steel shields. It is a spectacle of almost supernatural futility, and most terrifying of all, under this deluge that would have routed any other army in the world, the line of the Teutonic knights does not move. Not a single man breaks formation, not a single horse shies. They remain like statues of war, a wall of faith and steel, completely impassive. The psychological effect of this resistance is immediate and devastating. A murmur of disbelief and fear runs through the Lithuanian ranks. They have spent their first and most potent volley of fury to achieve absolutely nothing. The terrifying discipline of the knights is a weapon in itself, striking directly at the morale of their enemies. They begin to understand that they are not facing mere men, but something different, a brotherhood united by a purpose as rigid as the steel they wear. Frustration begins to corrode the confidence of the Lithuanian warriors, and doubt, like a poison, seeps into the hearts of their commanders. The rock has not moved, and the wave is beginning to feel fear. Driven by this frustration and blinded by the arrogance of their numerical superiority, the Lithuanian leaders make the fatal mistake the Grand Marshal has been waiting for. They interpret the knights' immobility not as discipline, but as hesitation. They believe that a massive, direct assault, an avalanche of sheer brute force, can finally break the line that the arrows could not even scratch. The order is given, and a savage roar erupts from 12,000 throats. The vast pagan army begins to move, abandoning any pretense of formation or tactics. They break into a run across the frozen field, an unleashed horde confident that its weight and fury will be enough to crush the enemy underfoot. The earth begins to tremble. The Lithuanian charge is an imposing sight. A tsunami of men and horses rushing across the plain, but as they advance, their cohesion vanishes. The faster men pull ahead, the slower fall behind. What began as an army is quickly transforming into a massive, disorganized mob, a perfect target. From his position, the Grand Marshal watches with a predator's calm. He sees the uncontrolled fury, the lack of discipline, the loss of control. He does not see a military charge. He sees his prey running straight into his jaws. He waits, letting them approach, timing the moment with the precision of an executioner, letting the tension stretch to the breaking point. Then, just at the instant the Lithuanian vanguard is about to clash, when they are too close to stop and the chaos of their own charge has made them deaf to any new orders, the Grand Marshal raises his sword. The signal is simple, unequivocal, and lethal. A single command shouts down the Teutonic line, and in a display of discipline that seems to defy human nature, 813-foot lances, adorned with black and white pennons, are lowered in unison. There is no hesitation. The movement is one, like a perfectly oiled machine. The forest of vertical lances becomes a horizontal wall of steel points, all aimed at the heart of the approaching horde. The next sound is that of the end of the world. With lances couched firmly under their arms, the knights dig their spurs into the flanks of their massive war horses. The line of motionless steel explodes into cataclysmic motion. 800 armored destriers, beasts bred for generations for this single, terrible purpose, break into a thunderous gallop. The ground does not tremble, it convulses. It is not a charge of men on horseback. It is the launch of a single 800-ton projectile of fanatical fury, a steel wedge designed to pierce, shatter, and annihilate everything in its path. The air fills with their war cry, Christus vincit, Christus regnat, Christus imperat. The impact is apocalyptic. The first line of the Lithuanian army is not stopped, not broken. It simply ceases to exist. It vaporizes in an explosion of blood and fragments of bone and wood. The Teutonic lances, which do not rely on the strength of the knight's arm, but channel the entire mass and velocity of horse and rider into a single steel point, strike with unstoppable energy. They pierce wooden shields, mail coats, and human bodies as if they were parchment, often impaling 2 or 3 men with a single blow before the shaft shatters. There is no fight, no resistance. There is only instantaneous and absolute physical annihilation. The physics of the charge is the key to the slaughter. The Lithuanian warrior in the vanguard is not struck by a man with a lance. He is struck by the combined force of nearly a ton of horse and rider, moving at 40 kilometers per hour, concentrated on a steel point the size of a coin. It is the equivalent of being hit by a small car. The Lithuanian formation, based on individual combat and agility, has no answer for this level of concentrated violence. The Teutonic wedge does not stop. It plows through the first ranks, then the second, then the third, tearing a bloody, ghastly breach in the very heart of the enemy army. The collapse is total and instantaneous. Panic, an enemy far more lethal than any knight, spreads through the Lithuanian ranks at the speed of sound. Those in the rear do not see the battle. They only hear the terrifying crash of the impact, and then see their comrades in the front ranks disintegrate, their bodies thrown through the air like rag dolls. Courage evaporates, replaced by a primal terror. The survival instinct overrides any loyalty or discipline. The vast horde, moments before a confident army, breaks completely and becomes a mass of terrified individuals seeking only a means of escape. With the enemy formation shattered and their morale annihilated, the second phase of the Teutonic strategy begins. The lances, now broken or lost, are abandoned. The knights draw their secondary weapons, longswords, war maces, and axes. The organized charge transforms into a brutal hunt. Now, inside the disorganized and terrified mass, the knights are like sharks in a school of fish. Their heavy armor makes them almost invulnerable to desperate, uncoordinated attacks. They move methodically through the fleeing horde, their weapons crushing skulls, severing limbs, and turning the retreat into an open-air slaughterhouse. The battle is over. What remains is simply a massacre. The knights, now supported by their infantry and sergeants who advance to finish off the wounded and prevent any attempt to regroup, are the absolute masters of the field. The Lithuanian warriors, who had begun the day confident in their overwhelming numerical superiority, are hunted down and killed without mercy. The frozen plain, once white and immaculate, becomes a red and black canvas, covered by the bodies of thousands of pagans. The victory of the 800 is not just a victory. It is an act of extermination, a brutal and bloody lesson on the power of discipline, technology, and fanatical faith. When the last cry of agony died on the frozen air, the silence that descended upon the field was that of a freshly filled graveyard. The arithmetic of the apocalypse was as simple as it was brutal. On the Lithuanian side, the dead were not counted in hundreds, but in thousands, a harvest of souls reaped in a single bloody afternoon. On the Teutonic side, the casualties were almost insulting in their insignificance. A few dozen brothers and sergeants, most wounded but not killed, protected by their faith and, above all, by their superior steel. The casualty ratio was not merely lopsided. It was astronomical, the kind of result seen not in a battle between armies, but in an act of extermination. It was not a victory. It was the practical demonstration of total military annihilation, executed with terrifying efficiency. And for the Lithuanian leaders who survived, those who managed to escape the carnage, the fate was a humiliation worse than death. Their retreat was not a tactical maneuver, but the desperate flight of broken ghosts, haunted by the screams of the men they had led to their deaths. Their authority, built on the promise of strength and victory, was shattered on the blood-soaked snow. How could they ever again inspire loyalty or fear after presiding over such an absolute disaster? Every step of their humiliating return home cemented the dark legend of the knights' invincibility, turning them into supernatural demons in the stories told around campfires. Their military prestige was not damaged, it was pulverized, leaving a power vacuum and a deep-seated fear that the order would know how to exploit. As night fell, the battlefield was a canvas of butchery under a pale moon, a promised feast for wolves and crows. The Teutonic knights, almost untouched, moved among the thousands of corpses with a methodical and terrifying calm. There were no loud celebrations or drunken revelries, only the murmur of a prayer of thanks to God for granting them the power to be his instrument of wrath. They collected the broken standards and weapons of the fallen, not as spoils of war, but as proof of their judgment executed. They were the absolute masters of a hell of their own making, the living proof that 800 men, united by faith and steel, could impose the will of their God upon an entire army and reshape the destiny of a nation with a single charge. Battles like this were not mere isolated episodes in the history of the Teutonic Order. They were the foundations of its power, the bricks of steel and blood with which they built their formidable monastic state in Prussia. Each such victory solidified their dominion over the region for decades, sending a shockwave through the pagan tribes and neighboring kingdoms. They forged a myth of invincibility so potent that often the mere news of the Grand Marshal's arrival was enough to quell rebellions or force concessions. They became one of the most feared forces in Europe, not only for their military skill, but for the systematic brutality it allowed them to wield, legitimizing the continuation of their colonization and forced conversion of the Baltic lands under the shadow of their Black Cross. The echo of this massacre transcended the battlefield to become a psychological weapon. The reputation of the Knight brothers preceded them like a plague of terror, a legend whispered on winter nights. The image of the Black Cross Knight became the boogeyman of the pagan world, the embodiment of an inevitable, mechanized death. This aura of supernatural fatality was, in many ways, more valuable than any fortress. It broke the morale of armies before the first sword was drawn and made tribal leaders think twice before challenging an order that seemed to know no defeat. Invincibility was not just a myth. It was a strategy that made the enemy defeat himself with fear. From a purely military perspective, the event became a foundational myth because it was the ultimate proof of a principle that would define medieval warfare, the supremacy of heavy shock cavalry in open country. It demonstrated that, under the right conditions, quality did not just trump quantity, but could annihilate it absolutely. It was the lesson, written in blood, that a small force of professional, technologically advanced, and doctrinally united warriors could disintegrate an army 10 times its number if the latter lacked the discipline and equipment to withstand the initial impact. The Teutonic charge became the gold standard, the textbook example of how concentrated force could break anything through sheer kinetic violence. Finally, The image of the Teutonic charge was seared into the collective consciousness of Europe, becoming the ultimate depiction of elite medieval warfare. The pristine white mantle over polished steel, the black cross as a symbol of austere and deadly faith, the thunderous gallop of armored destriers, and the forest of lances lowering in unison. This vision became the archetype of the Crusader knight in his purest and most lethal form. It transcended history to become a cultural icon, the embodiment of a faith as unshakable as its violence was absolute, an enduring symbol of the power unleashed when monastic discipline merges with the machinery of war. A Teutonic knight's lance was not simply a weapon. It was a kinetic energy delivery system, a masterpiece of medieval physics applied to annihilation. Nearly 13 feet long and couched firmly under the arm, the lance completely nullified the importance of human strength. It did not depend on the thrust of an arm, but transformed the knight and his armored warhorse into a single ballistic projectile. All the weight, all the velocity of nearly a ton of muscle and steel galloping across the frozen field was channeled and concentrated through the wooden shaft to a single though tiny point of steel. It was the perfect conversion of motion into death, a formula that made the courage of the man receiving it irrelevant. Therefore, the Lithuanian warrior standing in the front rank was not struck by a man on horseback. He did not die in a duel of equals, where his strength or skill might make a difference. He was impacted by an abstract and terrifying force, an equation of mass times acceleration. In modern terms, the impact he received was comparable to being struck by a small car traveling at considerable speed. Against such force, courage is useless, a wooden shield is paper, and a human body is simply an obstacle to be disintegrated. The legend of the 800 who annihilated 12,000 is not, therefore, the story of a miracle, but the brutal chronicle of how a superior weapon system, mercilessly applied, turns bravery into just another statistic on the battlefield.